of quality risk management. First is ISO 3001-2018, which was released in Feb 2018, ICH Q9 of Jan 2006, and WHO TRS 981 Annex 2 of 2013. ICH Q9 is currently under revision process and the draft have been circulated by ICH. As per ICH and WHO, QRM, that is quality risk management, is defined as a systematic process for the assessment, control, communication and review of the risk to quality of the product and across the product life cycle. We'll see some of the important definitions that are in place. First, harm. Harm is the damage to health, including the damage that can occur from loss of product quality or availability. Hazard. Hazard is the potential source of harm. Next is the risk. Risk is the probability of occurrence of harm and the severity of that harm. So we should understand that hazard is always present, but risk is the chance of you getting exposed to that hazard. If we see the quality risk management process, basically it can be of two types. First, that is the proactive assessment. Second, that is the reactive assessment. When we say proactive assessment, it can be done for the new product, new process, new equipment, etc. It can be done for any permanent major change, and it can be done as a part of periodic review of the existing product, process and equipment. When we say reactive assessment, it can be done for the market complaints, it can be done for the assessments of deviations, and it can be done for the out of specifications. So it can be simply said that assessment done without the occurrence of any failure, that is a proactive approach, is called as a proactive assessment. And whenever we do a risk assessment on the failure, that is once the failure has occurred, this is called the reactive risk assessment. Some of the few important points that we should consider during evaluation of any process is that all the risk cannot be eliminated. It should be noted that risk can never be zero. Risk is always there. We have to accept the risk. And to accept that risk, we have to bring it to a certain level if we find it out to be high. Not all the risk deserves equal attention. Some risks may be low, some risks may be medium, some risks may be high. So definitely the risks that are high will need a very high attention, and hence we need to have a criteria for categorization of such type of risks. And not all the risks are apparently readily visible to the naked eye, apparently available or readily apparent. Hence we need to have a very thorough evaluation of the process and the product for a better understanding. Few of the important areas of improvement of quality risk assessment are listed below. We usually follow a reactive approach mostly. Whenever there is a failure, we carry out an assessment rather than having a proactive approach. Second is, if we are planning to deviate some procedure, we usually carry out a risk assessment to justify that we are not following a step or we are skipping a step, which is again not correct. We are carrying out risk assessment once, but we are not carrying out the review of it periodically, because the risk rating might change depending on the time, depending upon the new introductions, right? And people do not have a thorough understanding. This is the most important aspect, and hence this video is very important, because people do not have a thorough understanding of this very important aspect. And this all leads to the regulatory observations which can have a major implication onto the business. ISO 3001-2018 defines certain principles for quality risk management. It defines the value creation and protection part. First, that is, the quality risk management should be integrated into all the organizational activities. It should be a structured and a comprehensive approach. Quality risk assessment cannot be the same for all the organization. They should customize it according to their own needs, following the basic minimum guideline provided by the regulations. It should have the involvement of all the relevant stakeholders. It should be dynamic and responsive to change. It should include the best available information, that is the historical data, the current controls, as well as an estimate of the future. It should take into consideration the most important aspect, that is the human factors that can influence, and it should facilitate continual improvement process. It also defines the framework for carrying out a comprehensive quality risk management approach, which defines the commitment from leadership team. The top management should ensure that QRM is integrated and all the organizational activities demonstrate leadership and commitment. It should be appropriately integrated into the organization, and leadership should ensure these things. The design of the QRM approach should have a better understanding of the organization. It should define the clear responsibilities. It should allocate appropriate resources and establish appropriate communication across the levels. The implementation should be through a defined plan where decision makers are clearly identified. The evaluation should be through well-defined key performance indicators. It should be timely, it should be measurable, and it should determine the suitability of the current process. And it should always be adaptive to change. It should have a continual improvement approach imbibed in itself. So if we see, the ICH-Q9 provides how to do the process of QRM, right? So for carrying out the process of QRM, we should know that who should perform the quality risk management, what systems should it cover, where is it applicable, when we need to perform, and how to perform. So let us see one by one. When we see who is responsible for carrying out the QRM, absolutely it is the system owner who is responsible for carrying out a risk assessment in his area. But the common misconception and the common practice of doing it alone in a silo sitting on a computer desk is not acceptable, because then it creates a bias. So it is definitely a teamwork where a cross-functional team, all the responsible persons, knowledgeable persons with scientific knowledge are involved into process, and they take part into the execution of the risk assessment, which will ensure an appropriate outcome of the assessment. What systems it should cover? It should cover the product risk, that is the risk during the product development, during the product transfer, during the execution of the product. It should include during the process risks, that is whatever process we are ensuring, whatever process we are carrying out, there should be mapping of the process, and risks should be defined at each level and should be controlled where the risks are not appropriate or not acceptable. Systems it should cover should include the facility, a comprehensive assessment of the entire facility, equipment, a comprehensive assessment of the equipment, and the people involved into the process. Applicability of the QRM principle as per ICH Q9 Annex 2. QRM is applicable and integrated into the quality management system, maybe the documentation, the training, the quality defects, auditing, in any aspect of product development, that is designing or establishing the specification, facilities and utilities and equipments, material management, production activities including validation, sampling, laboratory controls during the OS investigations or retest and expiry, and packing and labeling controls. The time for application. It is best for an organization to have a proactive approach rather than going to a reactive approach, because proactive approach can help increasing a very effective proactive CAPA implementation, which can drastically reduce the number of failures that occur. For understanding how to perform the risk assessment, first, the team should have a thorough knowledge of the principles of risk assessment. They should be aware with the risk management process, and they should have a hands-on experience with the risk management tools. So we'll see all three aspects, and which will give us a very thorough understanding of the risk management process. As per ICH-Q9, the risk management process should be based on scientific knowledge and linked to the protection of patient, users or consumers. We should have a thorough scientific knowledge whenever we carry out an assessment. For this, the collection of background information, the collection of scientific data is very important. The efforts that we put into carrying out a risk assessment should be commensurate with the level of risk. That is, if the risk is high or it is a high severity item, we have to put in more efforts to mitigate that risk. If the risk is low, we will comparatively require less efforts. WHO TRS 981 gives two additional principles, that is, it should be dynamic and responsive to change, and the capability of continual improvement should be embedded into the QRM principle. Initiation of the QRM process. To initiate the process, we need to carry out some background work, and the first of it is formulating a risk question, which is one of the most important point, because if we don't know what we are carrying out the risk assessment for, then apparently all the next steps will not be appropriate. So the risk question is one of the most important aspect. We have to assemble all the background information related to the risk question, including the potential harms and hazard and all the activities that it's impacted. We should identify a team leader for carrying out the risk assessment, as well as the resources required and the team who will be carrying out the risk assessment. We should specify the timeline for carrying out the risk assessment, define the timeline within which the mitigation actions has to be completed, and also define the appropriate decision making responsibility. We can use the flow charts where process is defined, a process mapping for the entire manufacturing process, which can ease the assessment of each and every step of the process. And one of the most important thing is brainstorming by the cross-functional team, by the operators involved, and by the people who actually execute the work. Remember, in the brainstorming, no thought is a vague thought. All the things that come up, all the things that are told have to be recorded and has to be negated with a scientific rationale. Now we see the QRM process. This process map has been provided in ICH-Q9 as well as ISO as well as the WHO TRS. So quality risk assessment, as per definition, is a four-step process. First is the risk assessment part, which include the identification of risk, analysis of that risk, and evaluation of that risk. The second step is the risk control, where if the risk on evaluation are found out to be high, there is a risk reduction, and based on the risk reduction, we accept the risk when it comes out to be low. The third step is the risk review step. When the risk is accepted and closed, we should carry out a periodic review of the assessment based on the available information in a defined period of time or when new information is available. And one step is the risk communication, which is across the risk management process, where the risk communication is shared with different level within the organization to make the people aware of the process and the risks that are ongoing. We'll one by one see each and every step and how to execute that step for having a clear and better understanding of the QRM principle. The first step is the risk assessment part. So when we say risk assessment, is basically involves three important questions. First, that what things can go wrong if we are doing some process or a step, what wrong can happen with that process or with that step, what is the likelihood that that process will go wrong, that is the probability of occurrence, and what will happen that if it is go wrong, that what is the severity. So the first step is risk identification in the risk assessment process. Risk identification defines the question of what might go wrong. So if we see an example of crossing a road, we can either, what might go wrong is we can either be hit by an incoming vehicle, that is a vehicle being in a very close proximity to us, and we can either fall down while crossing a road. So this what might go wrong is actually the risk with that particular process, which is also called as the potential failure mode during the risk assessment process, right? So if a process step is crossing a road, there is a chance that a vehicle is in close proximity while I am crossing and I'll fall down while I'm crossing, right? So we'll take this example and move forward through the entire risk assessment process and see how we'll determine these risks, how we'll evaluate it, how we'll mitigate it, right? So the next step, we have identified the risk, right? While crossing the road, there can be two risks where we have a vehicle in the close proximity and we can be either falling down, right? Now for risk analysis, there are three important aspects based on which the risk is analyzed. The first is severity, second is the likelihood of the occurrence, and third is the detection. The risk analysis can either be in a qualitative form or in a quantitative form. Qualitative means we have a criteria for severity, likelihood and detection, that is low, medium and high severe, low likelihood of occurrence, medium likelihood of occurrence and high likelihood of occurrence, and low level of detection, medium level of detection and high level of detection. And when we say a quantitative approach, severity of 1 for example is very less and severity of 5 is very high. Occurrence of 1 is very low chance of occurrence and occurrence of 5 is very high chance of occurrence. And detection of 1 is very high detection, that I will be able to detect that event very easily, and of 5 that will not be able to detect that event. So this quantitative scale of 1 to 5 is dependent on an organization. It is not a fixed criteria for having a numbering from 1 to 5, but this is general approach which most of the organizations use. One of the important things is to remember is the severity, occurrence and detection represent the all three phases, that is the past, present and future. If we see the severity, we see or try to predict the future, that if this failure occurs, what will happen. So we are trying to predict the future, if this occurs, what will happen. The likelihood of occurrence. The likelihood of occurrence is mainly dependent on our past experiences, that whether these failures have occurred, is there a historical data, right? And the detection is the current controls we have in place. So this is a very unique approach where all the three things are considered. Now once we have analyzed, we want to use our current example for having those analysis. In the first step, what we did was the risk identification part, where while crossing a road, a speeding vehicle came into the close proximity can be a failure mode or a risk, and falling down can be another risk, right? So now we will evaluate this with the current example. But for moving ahead, for giving the severity, occurrence and detection rating, there are two other important things that we should note. First, that is the potential cause of that failure occurring and the current controls, right? So in the example, a speeding vehicle in the close proximity, why it can occur while crossing a road? If we do not cross the road on the zebra crossing, right? This can occur. See, the potential causes are all hypothetical causes which we have to assume, right? So it can occur if we do not cross the road on the zebra crossing. It can occur if we do not wait for a walk signal to go green, right? It can occur if we do not look for the incoming vehicles, and it can occur if we use a mobile phone where our attention is on the mobile and we are not paying any attention to the vehicle in the proximity, right? And for falling down, why we can fall down? If we run while crossing the road, then we can fall down. Now we'll go into check the current controls for each of the potential cause. If I say if we do not cross the road on the zebra crossing, I'll say that zebra crossing is available and I have a habit, I always cross the road on the zebra crossing, right? If I do not wait for green signal, I'll say walk signal is clearly available and visible and I have the habit of always and always going on to the green signal only. If we do not look for the incoming vehicles, here I am a little bit shaky. Yeah, I usually look, but not all the times look for the incoming vehicles. So here there might be a chance that vehicle can come in close proximity due to this reason specifically. And if I use the mobile phone while crossing, so I usually do not use the phone, but the thing is, like, I sometimes do. So I'm here again not sure, and here I seem there's some risk that yes, I do talk on phone while crossing the road. And if I am running to cross the road, no, I never run. So I always walk to cross the road. Now we will give the rating for severity, occurrence and detection for this data, right? severity rating is independent and it is directly affected by what might go wrong. So if a speeding vehicle comes in the close proximity, the effect will be either you will be hit by this vehicle or you will be in a panic situation, right? So the severity for this will be very high. If you are hit by this vehicle, definitely there is an accident, there can be a major damage, right? And in the second case, if you fall down, there can be a medium level of severity, because you can fall down on the road where no vehicle is in the proximity, but it can still damage your knees and your elbows. Okay. Now, based on the available potential cause and the current controls, we will give the occurrence and detection rating. So if I cross the road always on the zebra crossing, the chances of occurrence of a speeding vehicle coming near me is very low, right? And if the vehicle comes also, if I am crossing on the zebra crossing, the driver as well as I am aware that I am crossing on the zebra crossing, and there are very less chance that they'll come very near to me, right? So the detection is very high. I always cross on the green signal, so occurrence is very low, and green signal is easily visible, the detection is very high. But here in this case, I am not sure whether I always see the incoming vehicles, right? So here the chances of occurrence of incoming vehicle due to this specific reason is medium. So if we see the occurrence, we give a medium rating, and detection I'm not always seeing, so I'll not be able to detect, and if that person also is who is driving is not very much aware of the fact, then the detection is also medium. If I use a mobile phone, I will never pay a heed to the incoming vehicle, and there are chances, again medium chances of the vehicle being near to me, and again the detection due to I am engaged in the mobile is medium. But in the case where I always walk around, there are very less chances of me falling down, and if I fall down, if I am falling down or something, I am running, I will be able to detect myself and I will not run. So in this case, what we have did is we have identified the risk, we have given the potential causes, the current controls, and we have given the rating for severity, occurrence and detection based on the evaluation of data. So this simple example I have selected because it will have a better understanding. In the next video, we will see a more specific pharmaceutical related example. Moving ahead with the risk evaluation part. Now, the risk evaluation compares the identified and analyzed risk against the given criteria. As we have seen, now we need the criteria for risk rating based on severity, occurrence and detection. So, in the previous table, what we did was we determined the severity, occurrence and detection rating for what might go wrong for crossing a road. So, the risk evaluation part consider this severity, occurrence and detection rating to give you a value which can help in categorization of that specific risk. So, these values are used for risk categorization. For a matrix defining the risk category to be assigned should be available considering the severity, occurrence and detection part. So, for a qualitative criteria, if it considers only the severity and occurrence part, this table depicts the values given. For example, if the severity is low and the occurrence is high, the risk comes out to be medium. While if the severity is high and the occurrence is high, the risk comes out to be high. This is a less used criteria, where a more used criteria is a quantitative approach which gives the numerical values for risk. That is, if the risk value is less than 20, the risk is low. If it is between 21 and 40, the risk is medium. And if it is greater than 40, the risk is high. In this slide, we will categorize the risk based on the identified risk criteria. In this table, during the risk identification, we identified the risk, we analyzed the risk to identify the severity, occurrence and detection rating. Now we will evaluate that risk based on the identified severity, occurrence and detection rating. So, for the risk evaluation part, we first need to have a risk priority number, which is nothing but the multiplication of severity, occurrence and detection. So in the first case, if we see 5 into 2 into 1 will give you a RPN score, that is the risk priority number score of 10. The second is 5 into 2 into 1 is 10. 5 into 3 into 3 is 45. 5 into 3 into 3 is 45 and 3 into 2 into 1 is 6. Now what we'll do is we'll compare the identified RPN number to this given table and we'll give a risk rating. So in the first value is 10. If we can see in the above table, a value of below 20 is low. So this risk is low. This again is below 20 is low. The value is 45, which is more than 41, the risk is high. This again is more than 41, this is high, and this is below 20, the risk is low. The next step that we move ahead is the risk control part. For the risk control, if the risk is high, we have to have actions to reduce that risk to low level. If it is medium, we have to have actions to reduce it to low, or we should have some scientific rationale or scientific justification to accept that risk as such. And if the risk is low, the risk is acceptable to us and we do not need to have any further actions. Moving ahead with the risk control part. So while crossing the road, when we see we have identified the risk as low, medium and high, the three of the risks are low and 2 are high. We will evaluate this risk against this action criteria and define the actions. So in this case, if the risk is low, no action is required and the risk is accepted as such. This again do not require any action as the risk is low. But in this case, the risk is high. The risk is high because I do not usually have a look at the vehicles that are approaching. So I will need to have some action in place to bring down that risk to low. What I will have to do is I will have to always look for the incoming vehicles so that I am safe, that risk is reduced, right? Again, the next risk is high because I usually do not talk, but I sometimes do talk on phone while crossing the road. So I'll have to have an action for this. What action can I take is I should ensure that I will never use a mobile phone while crossing the road. And in this case, the risk is low. Then again, we do not need to have any action for that low risk. During taking of the mitigation actions, the actions that we take are known as the mitigation actions. We should understand that we cannot have action that can reduce the severity. For example, the severity is based on the end effect part. If a vehicle comes in the close proximity or if you are hit by a vehicle, you cannot reduce the severity of the impact that you will get. You can reduce your exposure to that vehicle by taking control measures, or you can increase the detection by seeing that vehicle from the front which is approaching, right? The risk assessment process do not just end with the identification of the action. It is far more ahead. So when you identify an action, when you implement that action through a change control or through a kappa, then after the implementation, you will, you see in the part of kappa effectiveness, you will have to evaluate the effectiveness, the effect of those implemented action onto the risk categorization. So for example, if you have identified some high risk earlier and you have taken some action, then you will have to evaluate based on that implemented action whether that risk has been reduced to low or it is still medium or high. If that post mitigation action, the risk is reduced to low, then no further action is needed, and this is called as the risk acceptance based on the post mitigation part. But if the risk is still medium or high, you will have to have some mitigation actions, again evaluate it through post mitigation assessment, and when the risk comes out to be low, you will have no further action, and this completes the process of the risk management. But again, here the process doesn't stop. It is an iterative process, that it is dynamic process, and this comes into picture through the risk review part. So you'll have to have a periodic review or a review when some new information is available. We'll have to carry out a periodic review throughout the life cycle of the product or the process for which the risk assessment is carried out. The final step, that is the risk communication, as we have earlier discussed, is across the risk evaluation process, and it takes place throughout the process wherever there is the risk communication needed. These are some tools we'll see into the next video, like the failure mode effect analysis, the fault tree analysis, hazard analysis and critical control points, the HAZOP, that is hazard operability analysis, preliminary hazard analysis, and risk ranking and risk filtering. We'll see the detailed execution of specifically the FMEA tool into the next video. In the overall summary, as a process is, each process we can say is bound to have some risk which we cannot reduce to zero, but we'll have to have some acceptable level, we'll have to have some controls to bring up to the acceptable level to accept that risk. We should have a well-defined approach for carrying out the assessment, and our approach specifically should target a proactive methodology to reduce the number of failures. In this, the training and education of people onto the quality risk assessment process is very essential so that they can have a better understanding for the execution part. At the same time, we should also ensure that we should not justify any violation of GMP through the risk assessment process, or we should not replace the root cause analysis through risk assessment. We should not remove the SOPs, inappropriately reduce the validation studies, or the people or resources due to these things, right?